I'm sure none of you have missed the media coverage of the devastation that Hurricane Sandy wrought upon the east coast of the United States, particularly New York and New Jersey. But do you realize that if we don't protect the polar ice caps, if we don't slow their melting, this flooding will be permanent? And this will happen all over the world. It will affect our food supply, it will flood our homes, and it will ruin lives. This is why we need to be urgent about protecting the planet, and because it will affect every one of us. Taking care of this Earth is the greatest challenge we have ever faced. Now, I will admit that I'm still young. Just last week, I told a 50-year-old that I felt really old because I turned 20, and I wouldn't recommend doing that. So I feel I'm still young, and I don't have all the answers. But today, I would like to explore what it means to be urgent at the very core of our human spirit. Because I believe that we each have the urgency within to protect this planet. And we can make an unbelievable difference if we act on that urgency. And I know this because I have done it. This past year, I led a youth delegation to the Rio Plus 20 Earth Summit, the largest UN conference in human history. But before I go further, let's go back in time to revisit a childhood memory. As a kid, I loved playing outdoors and being out in the fields, catching butterflies and collecting grasshoppers. I loved looking at the big blue sky, just daydreaming, not caring about what time it was or what time I had to go home. I was a kid. It was summertime. It was wonderful. I was a child with a pure love for nature. A child with absolutely no urgency for this world. Keep my childhood memory in your head. And as I grew older, my dad, who works for Environment Canada, taught me about environmental issues like pollution, species extinction, and climate change. And as I learned more about these issues, I became really upset because the one thing I loved, nature, was being destroyed. I was so upset and disturbed that I was moved to paint the images that were in my head, images of pollution, of chaos. I was upset, but I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to take action. And so I didn't do much about it for a few years. I just didn't think about it. I was aware, but I was passive, and I avoided tackling the problems. I had chosen inaction. But in high school, I became actively involved with environmental issues. And because of that, at the age of 17, I got the rare opportunity to go to the Arctic on an expedition with students on ice. I went with students from across Canada and around the world, and we were joined by polar experts, researchers, and journalists. And for 2 weeks, we were alone together, sailing eastern Baffin Island, exploring the seas, hiking the tundra, observing wildlife, and visiting Inuit communities. What did I see there? The Arctic is a magnificent place, a magical place, a spiritual place. For most of us who grew up in cities, the wonder of such a vast place is otherworldly. Just look at this. It is just impossible to describe with words. There were so many moments that I will never forget, moments that awoke my senses. Like when I found myself hiking through Auyuittuq National Park, a huge stone corridor carved by Mother Nature. You can appreciate how small and fragile and vulnerable we felt walking through there. We trudged through angry, frigid river veins, the force of nature on full display. And let me tell you, with one false step, you could wash away to your death. And as Boromir might say, one does not simply walk into Auyuittuq. But then I suddenly realized what I was experiencing. I was experiencing climate change firsthand. I was standing in this water created by the glaciers that were melting right beside me. I was standing in this water, the source of rising sea levels that will one day flood coastal cities. When I shared a laugh with these Inuit children, it was bittersweet because I know they are losing their way of life because the sea ice is retreating. They are the frontline victims of climate change. This mother polar bear and her 2 cubs are also victims. They are stranded on this island, surrounded by water which should be sea ice. And with no sea ice, they cannot hunt. And because they can't hunt, they have no food until winter. The Arctic made issues real to me. It was these moments that conveyed the urgency of what Earth means to us. It is what sustains us. We have to value it. We have to protect it. We each have to make a personal effort to protect it. It is up to us and only us to protect it. And so when I returned home, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had just seen. And for every day for the next 7 months, I kept trying to think of what I could do to take action. I had this fiery urgency burning deep within. I kept thinking, I wanted to make a unique and profound contribution with my life to this world. Because I knew and I know that we only get to live once, and I want my life to count. So I kept thinking about 3 things that kept going through my mind. 1, I had just gone to the Arctic with so many committed young people, just as passionate as I was, with the same desires and aspirations to make a difference. 2, I knew that the Earth Summit was coming up in 1 year, and I wanted to be part of it. And 3, I wanted to protect the polar regions. And suddenly, one day, the idea clicked. Why not lead a youth delegation to the Earth Summit to speak about polar sustainability in front of world leaders? I was overcome with excitement at the possibility of doing this, but this excitement was met by the strongest fear of my life. The fear that I couldn't do it. The fear that I would fail trying to lead this delegation. The fear that I didn't know how. After all, this was a big idea, and I'd never done something this big before. Now, you already know that we did make it to the Earth Summit, but I would like to share some of the early moments that were pivotal in making the delegation happen. First was the initial email that I sent to the expedition leader of the Arctic expedition. He's someone that I trust very deeply and felt comfortable telling my idea to. So I just emailed him and I told him my idea and I asked him what he thought about it. And he responded to me suggesting that I present my idea at a reunion event in front of other youth alumni of the polar expeditions. And so I did just that. A few months later, I spoke in front of 80 youth from across Canada and around the world. And when I presented my idea to them, it was met by the happiest and loudest clapping and cheering I had felt in my life. And right then and there, I knew that this idea had a chance. And right then and there, I was also very pumped, just so you know. And right then and there also, we had our first team meeting. As the summer started, those who wanted to be part of the delegation stayed in touch over email and Skype. After all, we were spread across Canada and around the world. But we started preparing, but we still knew that we still had 1 year to prepare for this, 1 year until the Earth Summit. But as summer ended, sadly, we lost momentum. I became paralyzed with fear and worry because I didn't know how to do this. So I had actually returned to that same rotten state of inaction that I had as a child. But one day, I received an email from one of the members of the delegation, and it changed everything. He said to me, "Hey, this delegation idea is running out of time. It is really possible to do, and it has massive potential for success. But as project leader, the responsibility lies upon you to put this into action." And something about his words that day spoke to me, and it brought me to my senses. It made me realize the opportunity that was slipping away, the opportunity to fight the good fight, to protect the polar regions. He had pushed me, and I was urgent once again. And so after that moment, we recommitted ourselves to making this delegation happen, to go to the Earth Summit. Here's our team. And we couldn't have done it alone. Over 8 months leading up to the Earth Summit, we worked tirelessly together. We were spread across time zones, across Canada, from coast to coast to coast, to the United States, to Mexico, to Norway, and Hong Kong. But even with such a great team, the fact of the matter is, there is no handbook to teach you how to lead a delegation to the United Nations. There just isn't. There just isn't. Also, there is no one out there to tell you how to work as a team across time zones. And there is no one to tell you how to navigate through the UN system. But we figured it out all by ourselves. And we struggled. But what drove us was our urgency, which pushed us past every obstacle, every unknown. It's been said that obstacles are those frightful things you see when you take your eyes off your goal. And that was certainly our experience. So for the next 8 months, we did everything we could to prepare for the Earth Summit. Leah handled our logistics and finances. Jenna and Audrey led our communications effort, getting us into 30 newspapers across the country. Jessica led our policy effort, arranging meetings with high-level decision makers from around the world. Graham, meanwhile, led our education effort, facilitating presentations to more than 2,500 youth. Oh, and Donovan and Bridget, you gotta love them because they wrote some amazing blogs. And there was also Beatrice, Ingrid, Fatine, and Carolyn, as well as everyone else who couldn't go to the Earth Summit. They all worked so hard in helping to write our peer-reviewed recommendation paper, which we sent directly to decision makers. And we also had some incredibly dedicated advisors, John, Paige, and Tim, as well as very generous institutional sponsors. 17 days before Rio, I was thinking, we had come so far, and we were so close to reaching our goals, to going to Rio. Going to Rio for the Earth Summit was now more than just a dream. We had done so much together in the last year. And on June 16th, 2012, we flew out from all parts of the world and met for the first time face-to-face at the Earth Summit. But what happened next, no one could have predicted. The warm and effective communication and teamwork that we had as a team online suddenly blew up when we met face-to-face because individual personalities came out and began causing rifts within our group. This was something we could not plan for, and we were completely scrambling. But in the few short days when we arrived, we learned to work together in person. Because we knew, as an international youth delegation, that we needed to stay united. What kept us together was our passion, our understanding, and our concern for the polar regions. And we want to ensure a sustainable future for the polar regions and the rest of the planet. So for 1 week in Rio, we knew we had to do what this whole year had led to, and we did. We spoke directly to decision makers, right in front of them, bringing polar issues to the international level, starting an international dialogue. And I'm serious that we started an international dialogue because we met with numerous countries, country delegations, government delegations from around the world. We met with the Canadian delegation, the Australian delegation, the European Union, as well as the Seychelles delegations. But we also met with 15 other government delegations around the world. Argentina, Brazil, China, Denmark, Dominican Republic, Finland, France, Japan, Monaco, New Zealand, Norway, South Africa, Sweden, Switzerland, Turkey, and the United States. We were in the plenary listening to heads of state speak. We got to share our experience with those back at home through media interviews and social media. And we got to have meetings. We got to meet and have meetings with heads of state. Here we are meeting with His Serene Highness Prince Albert II of Monaco. Here we are meeting with Norwegian Prime Minister Jens Stoltenberg. And here we are meeting with the Prime Minister of Denmark, Helle Thorning-Schmidt. We also got to meet legendary ocean explorers like Sylvia Earle and Jean-Michel Cousteau. And I personally also spent a morning with David Suzuki and his family. But you see, I couldn't have done this by myself. We did it as a team. And we achieved what we did because we had the urgency to go as far as we could. Let me tell you one more story. It is the story of Minnie Molly, one of our delegates. Minnie Molly is a young Inuk from TEDxUW, Quebec, a small remote community in the Canadian Arctic. Minnie Molly is an inspiration to me. She came to Rio all the way from the Arctic, and for 10 minutes, she spoke directly to former Quebec Premier Jean Charest about her opposition to Quebec's Northern Development Plan. She spoke truth to power out of urgency and necessity. She spoke for all the Inuit people and for all of us when she said, "We Inuit are very concerned and are watching you, because what you want to do may include harming our land, the land we have lived in and relied on for thousands of years. We are afraid. If you have the time to research, if you have the time to plan, then you must have the time to hear our voices. The world may seem too large for any one person to make a difference. But it isn't. My moment of realization came as I looked out at that sparkling polar horizon, realizing that each one of us has a huge capacity to make a difference. Who knew that as a 19-year-old, I could bring a delegation to the Earth Summit? I am living proof. There's a phrase that I've heard many times, but it's only now that I begin to understand its meaning. And it goes like this. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I spoke like a child, I reasoned like a child. But now that I am grown, I put childish ways behind me. I am no longer a child. we aren't children anymore. We each have a responsibility to protect this planet, to take care of it. We live in an urgent time, and urgent times require urgent actions by each and every one of us. So let me tell you this today. Dream big, be daring, and have courage. And remember, tick, tock, tick, tock, tick.